As you might have guessed, RPGs have grown increasingly popular in the past years. Hobby game sales from this study have shown that they've increased by 2 billion in 2022. And if we're talking about D&D, it's generated loads of sale, 100 million to 150 million in 2022. And this does not account how TTRPGs permeate so much of our pop culture and content. Internet shows and actual plays and podcasts are but a few examples. However, we also know that TTRPGs have been a traditionally white male suburbanite hobby, and that has changed pretty substantially from the past couple of years. But as Stephen Daschel said, a postdoctoral fellow at American University, people of color and women have always been part of TTRPG culture, and actual plays have been a great help to that. So it's no surprise that TTRPGs have had folks, especially on the margins, coming into the platform, and all of the amazing queer and trans indie developers in the scene. Think about games like Monster Hearts by Avi Alder, Be Gay Do Crime by Evan Saft, Thirsty Sword Lesbian by April Kit Walsh, Big Gay Orcs, and Hardwired Island, to name a few indie TTRPGs. I could go on, and this is not talking about the long list of 5e supplement created by queer creators. But I'm also not naive. TTRPGs are still a contentious space, and issues of representation, fair payment to queer creators, issues of unionization, and general harassment are still major concerns. Even questions of how to include LGBTQ+ characters are valid and tough questions to answer. And that is coming from a queer creator and TTRPG enjoyer, as you probably guessed. So I decided to do my best this Pride Month to answer that very question. How do you include queer and trans characters into your TTRPGs like D&D or others? But why is this a big deal? For some folks, they might not care, and to be honest, if you don't care and you particularly never want to include queer and trans characters in your RPGs, then I'll be honest, this video is not for you. But if you are interested, then continue watching. The first reason I think it's a deal is because RPGs can be a safe and affirming environment for queer and trans folk. No one wants to be harmed, and RPGs can facilitate awesome queer and trans stories that feature all of us. 2. It allows people to explore gender and sexual identity, especially if they're questioning themselves. 3. It can be a lethargic experience for people to see themselves in the worlds they build together. 4. And for young and old people, it can be a great way to represent the wide complexity that is the queer and trans experience, because our community isn't a monolith. And 5, it's cool. It's cool to roll dice, it's cool to be a D&D nerd, and it's cool to just enjoy TTRPGs and to play games. It's fun. So it makes sense why it's a big deal for a lot of queer and trans and marginalized folk. We want to live our lives like anyone else, and that might look like rolling cool dice after work or after school. So yes, we want to play fictional dungeon delvers, folks with cybernetic powers, or isolated investigators. And in all those experiences, we can create kinship at the table. But to do that, we need to know how to do that, and especially for the straight allies and the folks who are unsure on how to do it, it might help to have some advice on what to do and how to do it without creating major harm or uncomfortability at the table. So let's first ask the question of what does quote-unquote good representation look like? While that question is complex, I'm going to give you a simple answer. A good starting point is to treat queer and trans characters in your RPGs as fully realized people, whether you are the GM or the player. Being part of the LGBTQ+ community is not a personality trait, despite how much we might joke about it. Queer and trans folk are not monolithic. The issues we face are intersectional as much as our experiences are diverse. My experiences are going to be wildly different from someone in a different country, who grew up in a different environment, who is a different age, with different social, economic, and political standings. Likewise, I cannot fully represent the complex and multifaceted experiences that all queer and trans people deal with. So this looks like, especially if you're NPCs, don't pigeonhole them. NPCs should serve a purpose in your RPG. They can be an obstacle for your PCs to overcome, they can provide information, or they could be a quirky personality that the PCs can interact with. And to that point, kinda. Don't only focus on their queerness. Queer and trans characters are complex and multifaceted with various other things going on for them. Likewise, your NPCs and your player characters should have a name, goals, memorable traits, and mysteries to make them feel like fully realized characters. Here's an example. The adventuring party comes across a cottage in a densely packed forest. There, they see a married couple, a male dwarf named Chibata, and his human husband named Chip. The couple is somberly looking over their dying garden. However, as your party approaches, the couple in synchronization stop what they are doing and approach you carefully. The two finish each other's sentences, comedically, telling you the mysterious plague on their garden. They seem desperate for help, and offer cash in return for your assistance. In this example of the NPCs we have, Chip and Chibata, their goals, mysteries, and memorable traits are clear. Their goal is to get rid of this curse on the garden. The memorable trait is that they finish each other's sentences. And the mystery is the curse surrounding their garden. But remember how I said kinda before on the topic of making your queer and trans characters multifaceted? Well, it's because you can just have characters that are queer or trans just for the sake of them being queer or trans. But the caveat is, it's also okay to just say they exist and keep the story moving. Example, you're playing Call of Cthulhu. Your investigators approach a sapphic nightclub called Pink Metal during June. There are several queer couples outside. In this example, these characters that are NPCs don't need to be queer, but they simply are because I as a GM chose for that. And it's okay, as much as the example before where their queer and trans identity didn't matter. What matters is that you can make queer and trans characters in your RPGs. It's truly just a matter of being nuanced about it and not just being shoehorned in or being dehumanized or just generally being treated like crap or showing a crappy representation with really terrible tropes. Because, and third point, consent is key. RPGs allow us to express and explore different relationships, emotions, and identities. To do this, you need consent. All players should be aware of what their game's relationships, romance, and adult activities might look like in RPGs. This conversation of consent can create an environment where LGBTQ+ characters, players, and their allies are not breaking unestablished boundaries or making others at the table feel uncomfortable, especially when it's not wanted. So we have an idea of what good representation might look like, but what does bad representation in a TTRPG look like? Well, like a good representation, it's nuanced. There's no one-stop answer since bad is pretty darn vague. Rather, there are general things to avoid, and the biggest overarching point is that it's best to avoid stereotypes. Anything and everything that dehumanizes LGBTQ+ folk down to a stereotype, stereotypes that are likely based in bigotry, are not ideas you want to apply to your characters. In fact, the problem with stereotyping is that it assumes that everyone within a certain group shares the same characteristics, when we all know that ain't the case. And this stereotyping can lead to harmful ideas and perception, so it's best to avoid these overall. But what's the difference between a trope and a stereotype? Because some of you might be wondering, Blurty, I use tropes to convey easy information to my players all the time. You're telling me I can't use tropes? Well, random stranger, no, I'm not telling you that at all. Because tropes and stereotypes are different. Tropes are useful writing and creative tools to convey easy information to players. When a trope appears, it's an assumed cultural norm in a medium. For instance, I made a video about the egoist. That is a trope that tells you a lot about a character's personality and potential behaviors without needing to convey a lot of information to the audience, or to your players in this case. Or think of my Proud Elite video. When I say this trope, you instantly can think of a character that fits into that trope. However, harm can occur when these tropes become stereotypes. Stereotypes are generalized images of a person. Stereotypes refer to beliefs held about groups in reality, not types of characters like a trope might. For instance, here are some negative stereotypes that exist for queer and trans individuals. The feminine gay man, the gay best friend, the angsty trans person, the woman turned lesbian, the sissy villain, and the burying your gays trope. These stereotypes can convey negative information and ideas about a group of people, shrinking them down into monoliths. It assumes that all gay men are feminine, or all women who had some traumatic experience turned queer because of some cruddy experience. but you realize that you messed up. You're watching this video, or you're looking through your notes, or you're playing a character that is queer, and you realize that you participated in creating that harmful stereotype, or you contributed to that. Generally, and especially towards the straight allies or cis allies, if you're genuinely trying, you're genuinely doing your reading, and you have queer and trans friends, I might sound like a weirdo for this, but if you're trying your best and making mistakes, it's okay. We all mess up. Seriously, for allies and people trying to learn, that matters more than you not trying at all or you not accepting that you made a genuine mistake. First, let's ask the question of why did you need that stereotype? What does it add to the NPC, PC, or to the world? For instance, why is it that all the villains and or antagonists are codified as queer or trans or quote-unquote sissies? Why is it that all of the gay characters you have in your RPG die horrible deaths? That's something you need to unpack and ask yourself, and also listen to your players when they say there's a problem. Secondly, does this NPC or PC have depth? Or are they just a walking stereotype? Now, there is nothing wrong with having a feminine gay man. Femininity is amazing as much as masculinity is, and everyone should be able to express themselves as they see fit. But if all of the queer characters, especially men, are feminine, then it's a bit weird and you really need to investigate that. And third, consult your close friends, ask if what you're including might be harmful. Have a serious conversation about the material you're including, especially if it's related to queer and trans people, and especially if you are not queer or trans yourself. We are bound to make mistakes, so it's up to us to make decisions and to learn from the problematic behavior we've learned growing up. So it's okay to ask queer trans people, especially if you're cis and straight, about queer and trans characters, as long as you give us advance notice, ask us questions, and if we have the energy to respond. And when in doubt, you can always go on the internet and ask the internet. Playing RPGs is fun. I get to explore the characters I want, I can explore the identities I want, and most certainly I get to just have a good and grand time with the folks I've curated at my TTRPG table. But I also know we are all bound to make mistakes in a messy world where we learn problematic behavior from our environment, from others, and certainly from the stuff we've internalized. It's part of our life. Like the characters you play, we will roll low and fail miserably. We will all make mistakes and harm others by accident or even on purpose. But it's up to us and the folks around the table to do better every step of the way. And TTRPGs can allow for that environment. They can provide fun, challenging, and goofy environments for you to explore the topics you want. They can be intense combat and drama-driven games, or a game you made up on the fly with drinks around a dingy table. And for queer and trans individuals, community members, and all of us, these spaces provide a way to form long-lasting bonds despite how much the world would otherwise want to erase us. So, if you learned anything from this video, know that creating an enjoyable time at the table can make a big difference for some folk who might not have that. Because queer and trans people deserve to be at the table and enjoy role-playing games as much as our straight, cis counterparts. And if you disagree, then you can let me know down below in the comment section, because trust me, I'll gladly deal with all that nonsense. And as always, I'm your average everyday queer host, Blurdy Disposition. Hope you all have an awesome day. Ciao.